The Origin of Species, written by Charles Darwin, published on November 24th, 1859. This is one of the most important scientific books ever written, perhaps the most important. It's a book that changed everything: how we understand life, how we see ourselves, how we think about our place in nature. It's a book that sparked controversy when it was published and continues to be debated today, more than 160 years later. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist who lived from 1809 to 1882. He wasn't always planning to revolutionise science. In fact, he studied to become a clergyman at Cambridge University, but his real passion was nature, collecting beetles, observing birds, studying geology. This passion led him on a journey that would change the world. In 1831, when Darwin was just 22 years old, he was offered a position as a naturalist aboard HMS Beagle, a British survey ship. The voyage was supposed to last 2 years, but ended up lasting nearly 5. Darwin sailed around the world, visiting South America, the Galapagos Islands, Australia, and many other places. Everywhere he went, he collected specimens, made observation, filled notebooks with his thoughts. What Darwin saw on this voyage puzzled him. He noticed that animals on islands resembled animals on the nearest mainland, but with differences. He saw fossils of extinct creatures that looked similar to living animals. He observed finches on different Galapagos Islands with different beak shapes. These observations didn't make sense if, as most people believed, each species had been created separately and remained unchanged since creation. Darwin came home from the voyage in 1836 with questions. Why did island species resemble mainland species? Why were some species extinct while others survived? Why did different islands have different varieties of the same type of bird? He spent the next 20 years thinking about these questions, gathering evidence, testing ideas, trying to understand what he'd seen. The idea that eventually emerged was radical and revolutionary. Species were not fixed and unchanging. They evolved over time, they changed, adapted, diverged from common ancestors, and the mechanism driving this change was what Darwin called natural selection, the survival and reproduction of individuals with traits that help them survive in their environment. This idea contradicted the prevailing view of Darwin's time. Most people, including most scientists, believed that each species had been created by God in its current form and remained unchanged. The diversity of life was explained by separate acts of creation. The Earth itself was thought to be only a few thousand years old, based on biblical chronology. Darwin's theory challenged all of this. It suggested that life had a history, that species changed over vast periods of time, that all living things were related through common ancestry. Humans were not separate from nature, but part of it, descended from earlier forms of life just like every other species. You might wonder why Darwin waited 20 years to publish his theory. The answer is complex. Partly he wanted to gather overwhelming evidence before making such a bold claim. Partly he was worried about the reaction. He knew his ideas would be controversial, even shocking. His wife Emma was deeply religious, and Darwin worried about upsetting her. He also worried about his scientific reputation. What finally pushed Darwin to publish was a letter he received in 1858 from a young naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace had independently come up with the same idea of evolution by natural selection. Suddenly, Darwin realised he might lose priority for the discovery he'd been working on for 2 decades. So he rushed to finish his book, which he called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. The first edition sold out on the first day. People were fascinated and horrified in equal measure. The book went through 6 editions in Darwin's lifetime, with Darwin constantly revising and adding new evidence. The theory sparked fierce debates in churches, universities, newspapers, and drawing rooms across Britain and beyond. What makes this book so important? It's not just that it proposed evolution. Other thinkers had suggested that species might change over time. What made Darwin's work revolutionary was his proposed mechanism, natural selection. He showed how evolution could happen through entirely natural processes, without any need for divine intervention or direction. The Origin of Species is built on a simple but powerful argument. First, organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. Second, these offspring vary from each other in many traits. Third, some variations make individuals more likely to survive and reproduce in their particular environment. Fourth, traits that help survival and reproduction get passed to the next generation more often than traits that don't help. Over many generations, this process leads to change, evolution. This might sound obvious to us now, but it was radical in 1859. Darwin was saying that the intricate adaptations we see in nature, the eye of an eagle, the camouflage of a moth, the cooperation of bees, all arose through this natural process, not through special creation. Complex design could emerge without a designer through the accumulation of small changes over immense periods of time. The book is organised carefully. Darwin starts with variation in domestic animals and plants, something everyone was familiar with. He shows how breeders can create new varieties through artificial selection, choosing which individuals to breed based on desired traits. Then he argues that nature does something similar, but without a conscious breeder. Natural selection replaces the breeder's choice. From there, Darwin tackles challenges to his theory. How can natural selection produce complex organs like the eye? Why don't we see more transitional forms in the fossil record? How can selection work onto traits that don't seem useful? Darwin addresses each objection carefully, honestly acknowledging difficulties while showing how his theory can account for them. The book is rich with examples from nature. Darwin was an incredibly careful observer. He studied barnacles for 8 years. He experimented with plant breeding. He corresponded with naturalists, farmers, pigeon fanciers, and gardeners all over the world. He examined fossil collections, studied geographical distributions, observed animals' behaviour. Every claim in the book is backed by detailed evidence, but Darwin also wrote for a general audience, not just for scientists. He used clear language, vivid examples, and careful reasoning. He wanted people to understand his ideas, even if they disagreed with them. The result is a book that's scientifically rigorous but also readable, a book that changed the world not just because of its ideas, but because of how those ideas were presented. Now, we should be honest about what the book doesn't say. Darwin barely mentions human evolution in The Origin of Species. He saves that explosive topic for later books. He also doesn't fully understand heredity. The field of genetics didn't exist yet, and Darwin didn't know about genes or DNA. Some of his ideas about inheritance were wrong, but the core argument, that species evolve through natural selection, has stood the test of time. In fact, Darwin's theory has only gotten stronger since 1859. The discovery of genetics explained how traits are inherited, something Darwin couldn't explain. The fossil record has filled in many gaps. Studies of DNA have confirmed evolutionary relationships. Modern biology has provided overwhelming evidence for evolution, from molecular biology to developmental biology to ecology. But the controversy hasn't entirely disappeared. Even today, some people reject evolution for religious reasons. They prefer the biblical account of creation. Darwin understood this would happen. He was sensitive to religious objections, though he believed that science and religion could coexist, that understanding how God worked through natural processes didn't diminish God's role. As we journey through this book, we'll explore Darwin's arguments step by step. We'll see how he builds his case, how he addresses objections, how he marshals evidence. We'll understand why this book changed science forever. We'll see that evolution isn't just a theory about the past. It's a framework for understanding life itself, a lens through which we can see the unity and diversity of the living world. Let's enter Darwin's world, a world of careful observation and patient reasoning, a world where nature tells a story if we're willing to listen. Let's understand why The Origin of Species remains one of the most important books ever written, a book that fundamentally changed how we understand ourselves and our world. Darwin begins his argument in a clever way. Instead of immediately tackling evolution in nature, which would have seemed too radical, he starts with something everyone in his time was familiar with: domesticated animals and plants. His readers kept pigeons, bred dogs, grew garden vegetables. They knew that breeders could modify organisms through selective breeding. Darwin uses this familiar process to introduce the key concepts of his theory. Think about dogs. In Darwin's time, just as today, there were dozens of different dog breeds. Great Danes, bulldogs, greyhounds, terriers, they all looked dramatically different from each other. Yet all these breeds came from wolves. How did this happen? Through artificial selection. Humans chose which dogs to breed based on traits they wanted. Want a faster dog? Breed the fastest ones. Want a smaller dog? Breed the smallest ones. Over many generations, breeders created enormous variety. The same principle applied to pigeons, which Darwin studied extensively. He joined pigeon fanciers' clubs, bred pigeons himself, examined their skeletons. The variety was astonishing. There were tumbler pigeons that somersaulted in flight, pouter pigeons with enormously inflated crops, fantail pigeons with tails like peacocks, carrier pigeons with huge beaks. If a naturalist saw these different types in nature, they might think they were different species, maybe even different genera. But they all descended from the rock pigeon. Darwin makes a crucial point here. Variation is the raw material of change. Individual organisms differ from each other in countless ways. Some pigeons have slightly larger beaks, some slightly longer wings, some different coloured feathers. These variations are inherited. Offspring tend to resemble their parents, but there's always some variation, always some difference. Breeders take advantage of this variation. They select which individuals to breed based on the traits they want to enhance. This is artificial selection. Over time, small differences accumulate into large differences. The process is gradual, occurring over many generations, but the results can be dramatic. Varieties that look radically different from their wild ancestors can emerge. Now, here's the brilliant leap Darwin makes. If humans can create such variety through artificial selection in just a few centuries or even decades, what could nature accomplish over millions of years? If selection by human choice can produce bulldogs from wolves and fantail pigeons from rock pigeons, what could selection by nature produce? But there's a problem. When breeders select for extreme traits, the organisms often become less fit for survival in the wild. Fancy pigeons with elaborate tails might not fly as well. Dogs bred for tiny size might be fragile. Vegetables bred for sweetness might be less resistant to disease. These organisms survive only because humans protect and care for them. Darwin addresses this. He points out that domestic selection often works against traits that would be useful in nature, and for traits that appeal to humans. Peacock's tail is beautiful to us, but cumbersome for the bird. But what if selection favoured traits that helped survival and reproduction? What if, instead of human choice, nature did the selecting? Darwin also discusses something he calls correlation of growth. When you select for one trait, you sometimes get unexpected changes in other traits. Breed for white cats, and you might get more deaf cats. Breed for one feature, and connected features change too. This happens because traits aren't independent. They're connected through development and genetics, though Darwin didn't know the genetic mechanism. Another important concept Darwin introduces is reversion. Sometimes domestic breeds revert toward their wild ancestors when released. Escaped domestic pigs grow tusks and become more boar-like. Garden plants become more weed-like. This shows that the wild type is in some sense more stable, more fitted to survival without human help. Darwin spends considerable time on plants. He discusses how gardeners had created hundreds of varieties of cabbages, all from a single wild species. There were cabbages for eating the leaves, others for eating the stem, others for eating the flower buds. Think about it. Broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kohlrabi, all different varieties of the same species, all created by selection. The same patterns appeared everywhere Darwin looked. Wheat varieties, apple varieties, rose varieties, cattle breeds, sheep breeds. Wherever humans had selected for particular traits over many generations, enormous diversity appeared. The power of selection to create variation was undeniable, but Darwin also notes limits to selection. You can't select for traits that don't exist in the population. If no individual has a particular feature, selection can't produce it directly. Selection works on existing variation, enhancing some traits and suppressing others. It doesn't create variation from nothing. It works on the variation that's already there. Darwin also discusses how different breeders could produce different results from the same starting stock. Pigeon fanciers had different ideals of what made a good tumbler or a good pouter. Their selections diverged, creating different lines from the same ancestors. This divergence is crucial. It shows how selection can create diversity, how populations can split into different forms. One of Darwin's key insights is that small differences, accumulated over time, become large differences. You might not notice much change from one generation to the next, but over dozens or hundreds of generations, the cumulative change becomes dramatic. This gradualism, the idea that big changes result from accumulation of small changes, is central to Darwin's thinking. He also emphasizes that selection must be consistent and prolonged to produce results. Occasional selection of a few individuals won't do much, but systematic selection, generation after generation, creates real change. The breeder must be patient, persistent, always selecting for the desired trait. Darwin draws another important lesson from domestic breeding. Organisms are plastic, changeable. There are not fixed types. Given the right conditions and the right selection pressure, they can be modified substantially. If they are not fixed under domestication, why should they be fixed in nature? But there's a difference between artificial and natural selection that Darwin is careful to point out. Artificial selection is conscious and directed, the breeder has a goal. Natural selection has no goal, no foresight, no purpose. It's not trying to create anything, it simply results from the fact that some individuals survive and reproduce more than others. Darwin also notes that domestic varieties, if they escape and live wild, often can't survive. They've been selected for traits humans value, not for traits that help survival. This proves that selection can produce change, but it also shows that different environments select for different traits. The traits that make a fancy pigeon valuable to a fancier are different from the traits that would help it survive in the wild. By starting with variation under domestication, Darwin accomplishes several things. First, he establishes that organisms can change dramatically through selection. Second, he shows that variation exists naturally in populations. Third, he demonstrates that selection can work on small differences to create large changes over time. Fourth, he makes the concept of selection familiar and understandable. All of this sets the stage for his main argument. If artificial selection by humans can create such diversity in a few generations, imagine what natural selection could do over millions of years. If breeders can create bulldogs and fantail pigeons, what could nature create? This question leads us directly to the heart of Darwin's theory: variation under nature and the struggle for existence. Now Darwin shifts from domestic organisms to wild ones. He asks, do wild species show variation like domestic ones do? The answer, based on his extensive observations, is yes. Go into any forest, any meadow, any coral reef, and you'll find that individuals of the same species differ from each other. No two oak trees are exactly alike. No two sparrows have precisely the same markings. Variation is universal in nature. This variation isn't random or meaningless. Some differences affect how well an organism survives and reproduces. A bird with a slightly longer beak might reach food others can't. A plant with deeper roots might survive drought better. A faster rabbit might escape predators more often. These differences matter. But Darwin needs to show not just that variation exists, but that it can be inherited. If offspring don't resemble parents, then selection can't work. Fortunately, it's obvious that offspring do resemble parents. Children look like their parents, puppies resemble their parents. The inheritance of traits, though Darwin doesn't understand the mechanism, is undeniable. Now comes a crucial part of the argument. Darwin introduces what he calls the struggle for existence. This concept is central to understanding natural selection. What does he mean by this struggle? Darwin points out a simple mathematical fact. Organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. Think about it. A single oak tree produces thousands of acorns in its lifetime. If every acorn grew into a mature oak tree, the world would be covered with nothing but oak trees within a few generations. But this doesn't happen. Most acorns die. They're eaten by animals, they rot, they fail to germinate, they're shaded out by other plants. The same principle applies to every species. Fish produce millions of eggs. Plants produce thousands of seeds. Even slow-breeding animals like elephants could, if all offspring survived, fill the earth in a few centuries. But populations remain relatively stable. This means most individuals must die before reproducing. This leads to an inevitable conclusion. There's competition for survival. Not all can survive, not all can reproduce. There's a struggle, sometimes literal fighting, but more often competition for limited resources like food, water, light, space, mates. Darwin emphasizes that this struggle is most severe between individuals of the same species. Why? Because they need exactly the same resources. Two oak trees compete for the same sunlight, the same soil nutrients, the same water. Two rabbits compete for the same food, the same burrows, the same mates. This within-species competition is fiercer than competition between different species. The struggle for existence takes many forms. There's direct competition. Two animals fighting over territory or food. There's competition against the environment, surviving cold winters, dry summers, storms, diseases. There's competition with other species, predators trying to eat you, parasites trying to infect you, other species trying to use the same resources. Darwin uses vivid examples. He describes how a small change in environment can affect which species survive. He talks about experiments showing how plants compete with each other. He discusses how diseases can devastate populations. He shows how complex the web of life is, how many factors affect survival. Now here's where it gets interesting. In this struggle for existence, which individuals are most likely to survive and reproduce? Darwin's answer: those with variations that give them even a slight advantage. A bird with a beak slightly better suited to available food. A plant with roots slightly better at finding water. An animal with coloration that makes it slightly harder for predators to see. These advantages might be small. They might only slightly increase an individual's chances of surviving and reproducing. But over many generations, even small advantages matter. If individuals with advantageous traits are even slightly more likely to reproduce, their traits will become more common in the population over time. This is natural selection. Nature, through the struggle for existence, selects which individuals reproduce. It's not conscious selection like a breeder makes. It's simply the result of differential survival and reproduction. Individuals with helpful traits leave more offspring. Those offspring inherit the helpful traits. Over time, the population changes. Darwin compares natural selection to a sculptor. A sculptor doesn't create clay from nothing. They work with existing material, removing some here, shaping some there. Natural selection works on existing variation, preserving some variants and eliminating others. The raw material is variation, the shaping force is differential survival and reproduction. One of Darwin's important insights is that environments are complex and changing. A trait that's helpful in one environment might be harmful in another. A thick fur coat helps in cold climates but hurts in warm ones. Long legs help for running on plains but might be cumbersome in forests. There's no universally best design, only designs that fit particular environments. This means that as environments change, selection pressures change. A population living in a stable environment might not change much. But if the climate changes or new predators arrive, or food sources shift, then selection will favour different traits. The population will evolve to match new conditions. Darwin also discusses what happens when populations are separated geographically. If one population splits into two groups living in different environments, each group experiences different selection pressures. Over time, they diverge. They become more and more different from each other. Eventually, they might become so different that they can't interbreed. They've become separate species. This geographical separation helps explain a pattern Darwin observed on his voyage. Island species resemble mainland species but differ from them. The island's population started as members of mainland species, but separated on islands, with different conditions, they evolved differently. Natural selection shaped them to fit their island environments. The struggle for existence is continuous and relentless. In every generation, some individuals survive and reproduce while others don't. Selection never stops. This means evolution is ongoing, not something that happened only in the past. Populations are constantly adapting to their environments, tracking changes, responding to new challenges. Darwin emphasizes that the struggle is often invisible. We don't usually see animals fighting desperately for survival. Nature often looks peaceful, but the struggle is there, in seeds that fail to germinate, in young animals that don't survive to adulthood, in adults that fail to reproduce. The struggle is in who lives and who dies, who reproduces and who doesn't. He also notes that the struggle can be indirect. A plant doesn't fight an insect that eats it, but plants that are less attractive to insects, or more resistant to their damage, survive better. A rabbit doesn't fight winter cold, but rabbits better adapted to cold survive winters better. Selection works through all these different forms of struggle. One fascinating aspect Darwin discusses is the balance of nature. Species exist in complex relationships with each other. Predators control prey populations. Plants depend on insects for pollination. Parasites affect host populations. These relationships mean that the success of one species affects many others. Change one part of the ecosystem, and ripples spread throughout. This interconnectedness means that evolution isn't simple. It's not just one species adapting to a physical environment. It's species adapting to each other, in what modern biologists call coevolution. As prey evolve better defenses, predators evolve better hunting abilities. As plants evolve chemical defenses, insects evolve resistance to those chemicals. It's an endless evolutionary arms race. Darwin concludes this section by establishing the foundation for natural selection. Variation exists in nature, it's inherited, organisms produce more offspring than can survive, there's competition for limited resources, and individuals with advantageous variations are more likely to survive and reproduce. These facts put together inevitably lead to evolution through natural selection. Now Darwin explains his central idea in detail: natural selection. He's laid the groundwork. Variation exists. Organisms compete for survival. Some variations are advantageous. Now he shows how these facts lead inevitably to evolution. The logic is elegant and powerful. Start with these premises. First, individuals in the population vary. Second, some variations affect survival and reproduction. Third, variations are inherited. Fourth, more offspring are produced than can survive. From these simple facts, one conclusion follows. Individuals with helpful variations will, on average, leave more offspring than individuals without those variations. Over generations, helpful variations become more common. This is natural selection. It's not a force or an agent, it's a process, a consequence of the way life works. Darwin chose the term natural selection deliberately to parallel artificial selection by breeders, but he sometimes wished he'd chosen a different term because people misunderstood selection as implying someone doing the selecting. Nature doesn't select consciously. There's no breeder choosing which individuals reproduce. Instead, individuals with traits that help them survive and reproduce simply do survive and reproduce more often. The selection happens automatically as a consequence of differential survival and reproduction. Let's consider an example. Imagine a population of beetles living in a forest. Some beetles are green, some brown. Birds hunt the beetles by sight. On the brown forest floor, green beetles are easier to see than brown beetles. Birds catch and eat more green beetles. Brown beetles are more likely to survive and reproduce. Their offspring are also brown. Over generations, the population becomes mostly brown because brown is less visible to predators. This is natural selection in action. No conscious agent is choosing brown beetles. The colour shift happens because brown beetles survive better, and survival leads to reproduction, and offspring inherit colour. It's an automatic process resulting from who lives and who dies. Darwin emphasises that natural selection can work on any heritable variation that affects survival or reproduction. It doesn't matter if the variation is large or small, obvious or subtle. As long as it affects reproductive success, even slightly, selection can act on it. He also points out that selection is far more powerful than artificial selection by breeders. Why? Because nature has much more time and much larger populations. A breeder might work with hundreds of individuals over a few decades. Nature works with millions or billions of individuals over millions of years. The accumulation of small changes over such vast timescales can produce enormous transformations. Think about the human eye, that marvel of complexity. It seems impossible that something so intricate could arise by natural selection, but Darwin argues that it could through accumulation of tiny improvements over vast time periods. Start with a simple light-sensitive spot. That's better than no light detection at all. Add a slight depression in the spot, now it can detect direction of light. Add a transparent covering, now it's protected. Add a lens, now it can focus. Each small step provides an advantage, so each gets selected. Over millions of years, a complex eye emerges. Darwin addresses a key question. What about variations that don't seem useful? What about traits that appear neutral or even harmful? His answer is multifaceted. Some apparently useless traits might actually be useful in ways we don't understand. Others might be correlated with useful traits. Selection for one trait brings along connected traits. Still others might be remnants of features that were useful to ancestors but no longer serve a purpose. He also discusses sexual selection, a special form of natural selection. This happens when traits help individuals attract mates or compete for mates, even if those traits don't help survival. The peacock's tail is Darwin's famous example. It's cumbersome, makes the bird more visible to predators, seems like a survival disadvantage. But peahens prefer males with impressive tails. Males with better tails get more mates and leave more offspring. Sexual selection for attractive tails overwhelms natural selection against them. Darwin explains that natural selection works differently in different circumstances. In stable, crowded environments where resources are limited, selection might favour efficiency, doing more with less. In changing environments, selection might favour flexibility, ability to adapt to new conditions. In environments with predators, selection favours defences or escape abilities. In environments without predators, these defences might be lost. The power of natural selection lies in its cumulative effect. One generation of selection produces tiny changes, but generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium, the changes accumulate. What seems impossible in one lifetime becomes inevitable over millions of years. Darwin also discusses what he calls divergence of character. When a population has variation, natural selection doesn't just push everyone toward one ideal type. Instead, it can favour different variants in different directions, creating diversity. Why? Because individuals that are different from average often face less competition. They use resources others don't use, occupy niches others don't occupy. Think about Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands. The ancestral finch ate seeds of a certain size, but variation meant some individuals had slightly larger beaks, some slightly smaller. Those with larger beaks could eat larger seeds that others couldn't. Those with smaller beaks who were better at eating smaller seeds. Both extremes had advantages. They faced less competition for their preferred food. Natural selection pushed some lines toward larger beaks and others toward smaller beaks, creating diversity. This divergence explains why life is so diverse. Natural selection doesn't create uniformity, it creates variety, as different lineages adapt to different niches, different environments, different ways of life. The tree of life branches and branches, with each branch representing a lineage adapting to its own particular circumstances. Darwin emphasises that natural selection acts only for the good of the individual, not for the good of the species or the ecosystem. A trait that helps an individual reproduce will be selected, even if it's neutral or even harmful to the species as a whole. This might seem like a limitation, but it's actually crucial to understanding how evolution works. He also addresses extinction. Natural selection doesn't just create new forms, it also eliminates old ones. Species that can't adapt to changing conditions go extinct. This makes room for new species. Extinction and creation are two sides of the same coin. Both are consequences of natural selection operating in changing environments. One of Darwin's important insights is that natural selection can explain both adaptation and diversity. Adaptation, the fit between organisms and their environments, arises because selection favours traits that help survival in particular environments. Diversity arises because different environments select for different traits, and because divergence can be advantageous. Natural selection also explains why organisms aren't perfect. They are not optimally designed. They're just good enough to survive and reproduce better than the alternatives. Evolution works with existing variation, modifying what's there rather than creating from scratch. The result is organisms that work but aren't perfect, that bear the marks of their evolutionary history. Darwin is careful to say that natural selection isn't the only cause of evolution. He acknowledges that other factors can cause change, but he argues that natural selection is the main mechanism, the primary cause of adaptation, and the main driver of the evolution of complexity and diversity. The beauty of natural selection is its simplicity and inevitability. Given variation, inheritance, and differential reproduction, evolution must happen. It's not a hypothesis that might be true or might be false, it's a logical consequence of facts that we can observe. As long as these conditions exist, natural selection will operate. Darwin now faces a problem. Natural selection explains how evolution happens, but it depends on variation. Where does variation come from? Why do individuals differ from each other? What causes new variations to appear? These questions about the laws of variation were difficult for Darwin. As he didn't know about genetics. Mendel's work on inheritance wasn't widely known, and DNA wouldn't be discovered for another century. Despite this limitation, Darwin discusses what was known about variation in his time. He's honest about gaps in knowledge, acknowledging what he doesn't understand while organising what is known. First, Darwin notes that variation is universal. Every population of every species shows variation. No two individuals are exactly alike. This variation is the raw material for evolution. Without it, natural selection would have nothing to work with. Fortunately, variation is abundant. But where does it come from? Darwin discusses several sources. One is what he calls the indirect and direct action of external conditions. The environment affects organisms. Animals living in cold climates tend to have thicker fur. Plants in dry environments tend to have smaller leaves. Some of this is direct response to conditions. An individual developing in a cold climate grows thicker fur. Some might be inherited. Individuals whose genes predispose them to thick fur survive better in cold climates. Darwin struggles to distinguish between these two, between modifications that happen within an individual's lifetime and variations that are inherited. This is understandable because the distinction wasn't clear in his time. We now know that environmental effects during an individual's life usually aren't inherited, but genetic variations are. Another source of variation Darwin discusses is use and disuse. He believed, following Lamarck, that body parts used extensively might develop more, and that this development could be inherited. Similarly, unused parts might shrink, and this too could be inherited. A blacksmith's strong arms, if this trait could be inherited, would give his children a head start. We now know this doesn't work the way Darwin thought. Acquired characteristics, traits developed during an individual's lifetime, aren't inherited. But Darwin didn't know this, and the idea seemed plausible based on observations available to him. Darwin also discusses correlation of growth. This is the observation that different parts of an organism are connected in development. Change one part and other parts change too. Breed for white fur in cats, and you often get blue eyes and deafness. These traits are correlated, linked in development so that selecting for one affects the others. This correlation explains why selection can have unexpected effects. A breeder selecting for one trait might inadvertently change other traits that are developmentally linked. In nature, selection for one advantageous trait might bring along other traits that happen to be correlated with it. Darwin discusses what he calls compensation and economy of growth. Organisms have limited resources. Energy and materials used for one structure can't be used for another. This creates trade-offs. A plant that invests heavily in roots might have less to invest in leaves. An animal that grows large horns might have less resources for other structures. These trade-offs shape what combinations of traits are possible. He also notes that variation seems to appear more readily in some traits than others. Traits that are important for survival tend to be less variable. Selection has eliminated most variation in these crucial features. Traits that are less important, or that serve secondary functions, tend to be more variable. This makes sense. Selection tolerates more variation in less critical features. An important concept Darwin introduces is that of reversion, or atavism. Sometimes organisms show traits of distant ancestors that have been lost in recent generations. A horse might be born with extra toes, reminiscent of ancient horse ancestors that had multiple toes. These reversions suggest that genetic information from ancestors can persist even when it's not expressed, emerging occasionally in descendants. Darwin discusses sexual differences, why males and females of the same species often look different. This is usually due to sexual selection, but it's also related to general principles of variation. Males and females sometimes vary in different ways, respond differently to selection, and develop differently even though they share the same genes. He also considers the timing of variation. Variations can appear at different life stages. Some appear early in development, some later. Some appear in juveniles, some only in adults. When a variation appears affects how selection can act on it and what effects it has on the organism. One challenge Darwin faces is explaining how complex structures could evolve. How could something like an eye, with all its interdependent parts, arise through small variations? His answer involves two key ideas. First, each small step must be functional and provide some advantage. You don't need a complete eye to benefit from vision. Even a simple light-sensitive spot is better than nothing. Second, parts can change function. A structure that evolved for one purpose can be modified to serve a different purpose. This principle of pre-adaptation, or exaptation, though Darwin didn't use these terms, is crucial. Bird feathers, for example, might have initially evolved for insulation, only later being modified for flight. Swim bladders in fish might have evolved as flotation devices, but later been modified into lungs for breathing air. Evolution works by modifying existing structures, not by creating from scratch. Darwin also addresses the inheritance of variations. He knew that offspring resemble parents, that traits are inherited, but he didn't understand the mechanism. He proposed his own theory of inheritance, called pangenesis, which turned out to be wrong. According to pangenesis, every part of the body produces tiny particles, gemmules, that carry information to reproductive organs. This was an attempt to explain inheritance, but it wasn't supported by evidence. Despite being wrong about the mechanism, Darwin was right about the important facts. Variations exist, they are inherited, and they can be passed to offspring. The mechanism didn't matter for his theory of natural selection, only the fact that heritable variation exists. One pattern Darwin observed is that domesticated organisms tend to be more variable than wild ones. This makes sense. Under human care, individuals with variations that would be eliminated in nature can survive and reproduce. Darwin was not blind to the weaknesses in his own theory. In fact, one of the most striking features of The Origin of Species is how openly he addresses objections. Rather than avoiding difficulties, Darwin confronts them head-on. He dedicates an entire section of his book to the problems his theory faces, knowing that critics would seize upon them. His approach is careful, methodical, and honest. One major difficulty Darwin addresses is the existence of complex organs. How could something as intricate as the eye, the ear, or the wing evolve through small, gradual changes? Critics argue that these organs could not function unless they were fully formed. A half-formed eye, they said, would be useless. Darwin acknowledges that this seems absurd at first glance, but Darwin argues that this objection misunderstands how evolution works. He explains that complex organs do not appear suddenly in their final form. Instead, they evolve from simpler structures that already serve some function. A primitive light-sensitive patch is not useless. It allows an organism to distinguish light from dark. A slight depression in that patch allows detection of direction. Each small improvement provides a survival advantage. Darwin points out that eyes exist in nature at every level of complexity. Some animals have only light-sensitive cells, others have simple cup-shaped eyes, others have pinhole eyes, still others have complex lens-based eyes. These forms show a gradual series, not a sudden jump. Natural selection can act at every stage of this progression. Another difficulty Darwin discusses is the lack of transitional forms in the fossil record. If species evolved gradually, where are all the intermediate fossils? Why don't we see countless fossils linking every species to its ancestors? This was one of the strongest objections raised against his theory. Darwin admits that the fossil record is incomplete. In fact, he emphasizes how fragmentary it is. Fossilization is a rare event. Most organisms decay without leaving any trace. Entire ecosystems can disappear without leaving fossils behind. Geological processes destroy fossils through erosion, heat, and pressure. Many fossil-bearing layers have never been discovered. He explains that expecting a complete record of transitional forms misunderstands how geology works. The fossil record is like a book with most of its pages torn out. We have fragments, not a continuous story. Given this, it is remarkable that we find any transitional fossils at all. Darwin also points out that transitions are often rapid in geological terms. A population may remain relatively unchanged for long periods and then change more quickly when conditions shift. These relatively brief periods of change are less likely to leave fossils. As a result, species often appear suddenly in the fossil record, even though their evolution was gradual. Another objection involves instincts. How could complex behaviours evolve through natural selection? Instincts like hive building in bees or migration in birds seem too elaborate to arise gradually. Darwin devotes significant attention to this problem. He argues that instincts vary just like physical traits. Some animals show simpler versions of complex behaviours. Natural selection can favour slight improvements in instinct, just as it does physical traits. A bird that builds a slightly better nest leaves more offspring. Over generations, these small improvements accumulate into complex instinctual behaviour. Darwin uses the example of bees building hexagonal honeycombs. Critics claimed this required mathematical perfection beyond what evolution could explain. Darwin responds that bees don't consciously calculate angles. Instead, bees that built slightly more efficient structures conserved more wax and energy. Over time, selection favoured behaviours that produced the familiar hexagonal pattern. He also addresses sterile worker insects such as ants and bees. These individuals do not reproduce, so how could natural selection act on their traits? Darwin explains that selection operates at the level of the family or colony. Traits that benefit the colony increase the reproductive success of related individuals who carry the same inherited tendencies. This idea was deeply unsettling at the time, but Darwin shows that it follows logically from inheritance and selection. If worker traits help relatives survive and reproduce, those traits can spread even if the workers themselves do not reproduce. Darwin also considers organs of extreme perfection. Why do we see structures that seem more complex than necessary? Why aren't organisms simpler? His answer is that natural selection works incrementally and has no foresight. It builds upon existing structures. Once complexity evolves, it may persist, even if a simpler solution could theoretically work. Another difficulty involves the sudden appearance of new species. Critics argued that species appear fully formed, not gradually. Darwin again points to the imperfection of the fossil record and to geographical isolation. When populations evolve in isolated regions, their transitional forms may never be preserved or discovered. Darwin is particularly concerned with the age of the Earth. His theory requires vast periods of time, far longer than many physicists of his day believed possible. Some calculations suggested the Earth was too young for evolution to have occurred. Darwin admits this problem troubled him deeply. However, he argues that geological processes like erosion and sedimentation indicate immense time spans. While he cannot prove exact ages, he believes the Earth is old enough to allow gradual evolution. Later discoveries would confirm this intuition. Throughout this section, Darwin's tone is careful and restrained. He does not claim to have answered every objection fully. Instead, he shows that none of the difficulties are fatal to his theory. Many are due to incomplete knowledge, especially in geology and heredity. By openly addressing weaknesses, Darwin strengthens his argument. He shows intellectual honesty and invites readers to judge the evidence for themselves. Rather than presenting evolution as a finished doctrine, he presents it as a framework, one that explains far more than it fails to explain. This willingness to confront problems directly is one of the reasons The Origin of Species remains powerful. Darwin does not ask for blind acceptance. He asks for careful consideration, patience, and a willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads. Darwin now turns his attention more fully to instinct, one of the most challenging topics for his theory. Instinctive behaviours appear complex, purposeful, and often perfect from the moment an animal is born. How could such behaviours arise through gradual modification? How could blind natural selection produce actions that seem guided by intelligence? Darwin begins by defining instinct carefully. Instinctive behaviours are actions performed without prior learning, often in a similar way by all members of a species. Birds build nests without being taught. Spiders spin webs without instruction. Bees construct elaborate hives without understanding geometry. At first glance, these behaviours seem incompatible with evolution. Critics argued that instincts must be directly implanted by a creator. Darwin acknowledges the force of this argument, but he insists that instincts like physical traits vary. He provides numerous examples of variation in instinct. Different species of birds build different types of nests. Even within a species, nests vary in quality and structure. Some individuals build better nests than others. These differences affect survival and reproduction. Darwin argues that if instincts vary and if those variations are inherited, then natural selection can act on them. A bird with a slightly better nesting instinct protects its eggs more effectively. More offspring survive. The instinct spreads. He also emphasizes that instincts are not fixed. Animals can show flexibility and modification in their behavior. Some instincts change depending on environmental conditions. This plasticity suggests that instincts are not rigid programs but adaptable traits shaped by selection. Darwin uses domesticated animals as examples. Dogs show instincts related to herding, guarding, or hunting, even when they have never been trained. These instincts have been shaped by human selection. If artificial selection can modify instinct, natural selection can as well. One of Darwin's most famous discussions involves hive-building bees. The hexagonal structure of honeycombs appears mathematically optimal. Critics argued that such perfection could not arise without foresight. Darwin responds by breaking the behaviour down into simpler steps. He suggests that ancestral bees may have built crude cells. Bees that built cells more efficiently conserved wax and energy. Slight improvements in behaviour were favoured. Over many generations, this selection refined the instinct until the familiar hexagonal pattern emerged. Darwin reinforces this argument by noting that different bee species build different types of cells. Some build irregular structures, some build less efficient ones. This diversity shows that hive-building instincts exist on a spectrum, not as a single perfect design. Another striking case involves slave-making ants. Some ant species capture workers of other species and force them to labour. This behaviour seems cruel and complex. Darwin shows that related ant species display simpler forms of this behaviour, suggesting a gradual evolutionary origin. He traces a sequence from ants that merely steal pupae for food, to ants whose stolen pupae survive and assist in the nest, to ants that become fully dependent on enslaved workers. Each step provides a small advantage, making the progression plausible. Darwin also discusses migration. Birds migrate thousands of miles with remarkable precision. How could such behaviour evolve? He proposes that migration could arise from gradual changes in range. Birds might slowly extend their movements seasonally generation by generation, until full migration develops. Importantly, Darwin does not claim that instincts evolve easily or quickly. He admits that instinct presents some of the greatest challenges to his theory, but he insists that difficulty does not equal impossibility. Given variation, inheritance, and selection, instinct can evolve just like physical traits. Darwin also addresses the relationship between instinct and intelligence. He rejects the idea that instinct is merely degraded intelligence, or that intelligence is advanced instinct. Instead, he views them as overlapping traits shaped by different pressures. Some animals rely heavily on instinct, others rely more on learning. Natural selection can favour either strategy depending on circumstances. In stable environments, rigid instincts may work well. In changing environments, learning and flexibility may be favoured. Darwin emphasises continuity. There is no sharp boundary between instinct and learned behaviour. Many behaviours involve both. This continuity supports his broader claim that mental traits, like physical ones, evolve gradually. By the end of this section, Darwin has shown that instinct, though complex, does not contradict natural selection. Instead, it fits within the same framework. Behaviour evolves because behaviour affects survival and reproduction. Instincts are not mysterious gifts. They are inherited tendencies shaped by countless generations of selection. Like all features of life, they bear the marks of history, adaptation, and change. Darwin now turns to a topic that was deeply important to 19th century biology: hybridism. Hybrids are the offspring produced by crossing different species or varieties. At the time, many scientists believed that species were defined by their inability to produce fertile offspring with other species. If two organisms could interbreed and produce fertile young, they were considered the same species. If they could not, they were considered separate creations. This idea posed a challenge to Darwin's theory. If species evolved gradually from common ancestors, why should there be sharp boundaries between them? Why should some crosses produce fertile offspring while others produce sterile hybrids? Darwin approaches this problem carefully, aware that it could undermine his argument if not addressed convincingly. He begins by examining domesticated animals and plants. Different varieties of dogs can interbreed freely and produce fertile offspring. The same is true for pigeons, cattle, and most cultivated plants. These varieties often look dramatically different, yet they remain fully fertile when crossed. This shows that external appearance alone does not determine reproductive compatibility. Darwin then turns to what are traditionally called species. He notes that fertility between species is not an absolute rule. Some species can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Others produce hybrids that are partially fertile. Some hybrids are fertile in one sex but sterile in the other. Still others are completely sterile. There is no clear dividing line. This variation in fertility suggests that sterility is not a special barrier deliberately imposed at the moment of creation. Instead, it appears to be a byproduct of differences accumulated over time. As populations diverge, their reproductive systems gradually become incompatible. Darwin emphasises an important point: sterility is not an advantage. Natural selection cannot favour sterility between species because sterility prevents reproduction. If anything, selection should favour fertility. Therefore, reproductive incompatibility cannot be a direct product of selection. It must arise indirectly as populations diverge in other ways. He compares hybrid sterility to mismatched machinery. Two machines built differently may fail to work together, not because incompatibility was intended, but because their parts no longer align. Similarly, reproductive systems evolve independently, and over time, their differences make successful reproduction difficult or impossible. Darwin also notes that hybrid sterility often varies with conditions. Some hybrids are sterile in one environment but fertile in another. Some are fertile when crossed in one direction but sterile when crossed in reverse. These inconsistencies further undermine the idea of fixed, divinely imposed barriers. Plants provide especially strong evidence. Botanists had documented countless cases of hybrid plants with varying degrees of fertility. Some hybrids can reproduce asexually, some regain fertility over generations. Some are fertile only when crossed back with one parent species. This complexity is exactly what Darwin's theory predicts. He also points out that domestication can reduce sterility. Species that are normally difficult to cross may produce fertile hybrids under cultivation. This suggests that reproductive compatibility is influenced by conditions, not governed by absolute rules. Darwin addresses another objection. If species evolve gradually, shouldn't we see continuous variation in fertility? His answer is that fertility depends on complex interactions between reproductive systems. Small changes may have little effect until a threshold is reached, at which point fertility drops sharply. This creates the appearance of a sudden boundary. He also discusses what happens when hybrids are fertile. In such cases, hybrid populations may persist and even give rise to new forms. This blurs the line between species and varieties even further. Nature, Darwin argues, does not respect the rigid categories humans impose. Ultimately, Darwin concludes that hybridism supports rather than contradicts evolution. The patterns of fertility and sterility make sense if species are diverging populations, not if they are separately created entities. The irregularity, variability, and imperfection of hybrid fertility reflect a natural process, not deliberate design. Hybridism shows that species boundaries are not fixed walls but gradual transitions. They are the result of accumulated differences, not special acts of creation. In this way, hybridism becomes another piece of evidence for descent with modification. Darwin now confronts one of the most serious challenges to his theory, the geological record. If evolution has occurred gradually over immense periods of time, why does the fossil record not show a continuous chain of intermediate forms? Why do species often appear suddenly, fully formed, and then disappear? Darwin does not deny the problem. He admits openly that the geological record is extremely imperfect. In fact, he calls this imperfection the most obvious and gravest objection to his theory. But he argues that this imperfection is exactly what we should expect given how fossils form. Fossilization is rare. Most organisms die and decay without leaving any trace. Soft-bodied organisms almost never fossilize. Even hard shells and bones are often destroyed. To become a fossil, an organism must die in just the right conditions. Quick burial, low oxygen, minimal disturbance. Even when fossils do form, geological processes threaten them. Layers of rock are eroded, folded, melted, and transformed. Entire fossil-bearing strata can be destroyed. Others remain buried deep underground, inaccessible to human discovery. Darwin emphasizes how limited our exploration of the Earth has been. Only a small fraction of the planet's surface has been examined carefully. Many regions remain unexplored. Many fossil-bearing layers are hidden beneath soil, vegetation, or ocean water. He also notes that sedimentation, the process that creates fossil-bearing layers, is intermittent. Long periods may pass with little or no deposition. These gaps mean missing chapters in the history of life. Evolution may have occurred during these intervals, leaving no record behind. Darwin introduces an important idea. Species often remain stable for long periods and then change relatively rapidly when conditions shift. These periods of change may be brief compared to the long periods of stability. As a result, transitional forms may exist for too short a time to leave many fossils. He also explains why fossils often appear suddenly in a region. A species may evolve elsewhere and then migrate into a new area. When it first appears in the local fossil record, it seems sudden and complete, even though its evolution occurred gradually elsewhere. Darwin gives examples from marine fossils, where closely related species appear in successive layers. Though intermediate forms are rare, the overall pattern suggests gradual replacement rather than independent creation. He compares the fossil record to a history book with most pages missing. We have scattered sentences and paragraphs, but not the full story. Expecting a complete evolutionary record from such fragments is unreasonable. Darwin also addresses the objection that some major groups appear abruptly, such as the sudden appearance of many complex animals in certain strata. He argues that this may reflect earlier, unpreserved stages of evolution. If early ancestors lacked hard parts, they would leave no fossils. He emphasizes that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we have not found certain fossils does not mean they never existed. The history of paleontology shows that many missing forms are eventually discovered. Darwin points out that geology itself was a young science. Stratigraphic correlations were still being refined. Many fossil collections were incomplete or poorly studied. As geological knowledge improved, he believed the fossil record would become more supportive of evolution. Importantly, Darwin does not claim that the fossil record already proves his theory beyond doubt. Instead, he argues that its imperfections are understandable and expected. Given these limitations, the fossil record supports evolution as well as could reasonably be expected. He concludes by reminding readers that geology deals with immense timescales. Human lifetimes are insignificant compared to the slow processes shaping life on Earth. Our perspective is limited, but the patterns we do see, succession, replacement, extinction, align with descent with modification. The geological record, though incomplete, tells a story. It is not a story of repeated creation, but of gradual change, branching lineages, and extinction. Its silences are not contradictions, but reminders of how little of Earth's history has been preserved. Darwin now builds upon his discussion of the fossil record by examining a broader pattern: the geological succession of organic beings. This phrase refers to the orderly appearance and disappearance of species in the layers of the Earth. When fossils are examined carefully, they are not scattered randomly through time. Instead, they follow a definite sequence. In the oldest fossil-bearing rocks, we find simple organisms. As we move upward through younger strata, we see more complex forms. Species appear, persist for a time, and then disappear, replaced by related but modified forms. This pattern demands explanation. If species were created independently, there is no obvious reason why they should appear in a particular order. Why should mammals never appear in the oldest rocks? Why should modern species never be found alongside ancient trilobites? The theory of special creation offers no clear answer to these questions. Darwin's theory does. If species descend from earlier species, then newer forms should resemble older ones. And this is exactly what we observe. Fossil species are not entirely different from living species. They often belong to the same groups and share many features. Darwin notes that extinct species often resemble living species from the same geographic region. Fossil mammals from South America resemble modern South American mammals. Fossil marsupials in Australia resemble modern Australian marsupials. This pattern is striking and consistent. Why should extinct species resemble living ones from the same area rather than species from elsewhere? Creation theory struggles to explain this. Evolution explains it naturally. Descendants inherit traits from ancestors. When species change over time in a particular region, they retain a recognizable family resemblance. Darwin also observes that succession is gradual. Species do not appear suddenly, without any connection to earlier forms. Although the fossil record is incomplete, we often see species replaced by closely allied species. This suggests modification rather than replacement by unrelated creations. He emphasizes that extinction is a natural part of this process. As new forms arise, older forms often disappear. This is not because they were inferior in every way, but because they were less suited to changing conditions or outcompeted by better adapted descendants. Darwin argues that extinction and the appearance of new species are closely linked. When environments change, some species adapt and survive while others perish. The survivors may diversify into new forms, filling ecological roles left vacant by extinct species. He also discusses what he calls persistent types. Some species appear to change very little over long periods of time. This does not contradict evolution. If a species is well adapted to a stable environment, natural selection may favour little change. Evolution does not require constant transformation. Darwin uses the example of horses to illustrate succession. Fossil horses show a gradual series of changes over time, including changes in size, teeth, and limbs. While Darwin did not have access to the full horse fossil series known today, he recognized the general pattern. Another key point Darwin makes is that major groups tend to appear before minor ones. Broad categories emerge early, while finer distinctions appear later. This branching pattern resembles a tree rather than a ladder. This tree-like structure supports descent with modification. Life does not progress toward a single goal. Instead, it branches outward, with different lineages adapting to different conditions. Some branches flourish, others die out. Darwin also addresses the objection that the sudden appearance of new groups contradicts gradual evolution. He repeats that a sudden appearance is often an illusion caused by missing fossil layers. A group may have evolved gradually elsewhere before appearing in the record of a particular region. He reminds readers that geological time is vast beyond human comprehension. Changes that seem abrupt in the fossil record may still represent hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Darwin concludes that the succession of fossil organisms strongly supports evolution. The patterns we observe, replacement, resemblance, progression, are exactly what descent with modification predicts. Rather than seeing the fossil record as a series of independent creations, Darwin invites us to see it as a historical narrative. Each layer of rock is a chapter. Each fossil is a sentence. Though many pages are missing, the story that remains points clearly to evolution. Darwin now turns to geography, another powerful line of evidence for evolution. Why are species distributed the way they are across the Earth? Why do certain animals and plants live in particular regions and not others? Why do distant continents often have very different life forms, even when their environments are similar? At first glance, the distribution of species seems chaotic, but Darwin shows that beneath this apparent disorder lies a clear and meaningful pattern. He begins by noting that physical barriers play a major role. Ocean, mountains, deserts, and climate zones limit the movement of organisms. Species tend to remain near the regions where they originated, spreading gradually and less blocked. If species were created independently, there would be no reason for closely related species to be geographically close. But in reality, they usually are. Neighbouring regions tend to have similar species, while distant regions have very different ones. Darwin emphasises the importance of islands. Islands were central to his thinking from the beginning, especially after his observations in the Galapagos. Islands often contain species found nowhere else, yet those species resemble mainland species from nearby regions. The Galapagos finches are a famous example. Each island has its own varieties, adapted to local conditions, but all resemble mainland South American finches. This makes sense if a small number of ancestors arrived from the mainland and diversified over time. Creation theory struggles here. Why would a creator place slightly modified versions of mainland species on islands, rather than entirely new forms? Evolution explains this naturally, through descent and adaptation. Darwin also examines oceanic islands, those that have never been connected to continents. These islands often lack mammals and amphibians, which cannot easily cross oceans. Instead, they are populated by birds, insects, and plants whose seeds or eggs can be carried by wind or water. This selective presence of species is exactly what we would expect if organisms colonized islands by chance dispersal. It makes little sense under independent creation. Darwin provides experimental evidence as well. He tested how long seeds could survive in salt water and remain viable. He found that many could survive long enough to be transported across oceans by currents. This made long-distance dispersal plausible. He also discusses how glaciers and climate changes affect distribution. During ice ages, species ranges shift. When climates warm, species may retreat to isolated pockets, creating separated populations that evolve independently. This explains why related species are sometimes found in widely separated areas. They were once part of a continuous population, later divided by changing conditions. Darwin also points out a striking pattern. Similar environments in different parts of the world often contain very different species. Deserts in Africa and Australia have similar climates, but their animals are unrelated. This contradicts the idea that environment alone determines form. Instead, species reflect their history. They resemble nearby species more than species in similar environments elsewhere. History, not just adaptation, shapes life. He emphasizes that geographical distribution makes sense only when combined with evolution and extinction. Species arise in particular regions, spread as far as barriers allow, adapt locally, and sometimes go extinct. Darwin also discusses continental connections. Fossil evidence shows that continents were once connected differently than today. These ancient connections help explain why related species are now separated by oceans. He acknowledges that he does not know the full history of Earth's geography, but even with limited knowledge, the patterns of distribution strongly support descent with modification. In closing this section, Darwin argues that geography is one of the strongest arguments for evolution. The facts make little sense under independent creation, but fall into place under a historical view of life. Life is not distributed randomly, it carries the imprint of its past, of migrations, separations, adaptations, and extinctions. Geography, like geology, tells a story, and that story is evolutionary. Darwin now turns to classification, the way scientists organise living organisms into groups. At first glance, classification might seem like a purely human invention, a system imposed on nature for convenience, but Darwin argues that classification reflects something real about the natural world. It reveals relationships, histories, and lines of descent. Biologists classify organisms into species, genera, families, orders, classes, and so on. These groups are arranged hierarchically, like branches within branches. Species are grouped into genera, genera into families, families into larger divisions. This nested structure is universal in biology. Darwin asks a crucial question: why does classification take this hierarchical form? If species were created independently, there is no obvious reason for this arrangement. Why should organisms fall naturally into groups within groups? Why should similarities form a branching pattern rather than a simple list? Evolution provides a clear answer. Classification reflects common descent. Species that share a recent common ancestor are grouped together. Larger groups represent more distant ancestry. The hierarchical structure of classification mirrors the branching tree of life. Darwin emphasizes that naturalists do not classify organisms based on a single trait. Instead, they use many characters at once: structure, development, behavior, and more. This is because no single feature defines a group. What matters is overall resemblance, which reflects shared ancestry. He also points out that some traits are more important for classification than others. Traits that are deeply embedded in an organism's structure, such as skeletal features, are often more reliable indicators of relationship than superficial traits like colour. This makes sense if classification reflects descent, because deeply rooted traits change more slowly. Darwin discusses the concept of affinity. When naturalists say two species are closely related, they mean they share many features. Darwin interprets this as evidence of common ancestry. Affinity is not a mysterious property. It is historical relatedness. He also explains why embryology plays such an important role in classification. Embryos of very different animals often resemble each other more than their adult forms do. For example, embryos of mammals, birds, and reptiles share striking similarities early in development. Darwin argues that these similarities are best explained by inheritance from a common ancestor. Early developmental stages reflect ancient features that have been conserved, while later stages show more recent adaptations. Another important observation is that some organisms are difficult to classify. They share features with multiple groups. Darwin sees this not as a failure of classification, but as evidence of evolutionary transitions. These organisms occupy intermediate positions because their ancestors diverged relatively recently. Darwin also discusses rudimentary and vestigial organs in classification. Organs that are reduced or functionless, like the wings of flightless birds or the tiny pelvic bones of whales, still resemble fully functional versions in related species. These remnants are clues to ancestry. Such organs often have no clear purpose, yet they are consistent across related species. This makes little sense under independent creation but fits perfectly with descent with modification. Darwin stresses that classification is not arbitrary. It is discovered, not invented. Naturalists may debate boundaries, but the underlying pattern exists independently of human judgment. He compares biological classification to a family tree. Close relatives share many traits. More distant relatives share fewer. The same logic applies to species. The system works because it reflects history. Darwin also notes that extinct species often help clarify classification. Fossils reveal intermediate forms that link modern groups. These discoveries strengthen the idea that groups are connected through descent. In this view, classification becomes a record of evolutionary history. It is not just a tool for naming organisms, but a framework for understanding their origins and relationships. Darwin concludes that the nested structure of life is one of the strongest arguments for evolution. It is exactly what we would expect if all organisms descended from common ancestors. Without evolution, classification remains as an unexplained coincidence. With evolution, it becomes inevitable. Darwin now deepens his argument by examining morphology, the study of form and structure, and embryology, the study of development. These fields reveal patterns that are difficult to explain without evolution. He begins with morphology. Different animals often share the same basic structural plan, even when their outward appearances and functions differ dramatically. The forelimbs of humans, bats, whales and horses look very different and serve very different purposes, yet beneath the surface they share the same arrangement of bones. This similarity is not due to function. A whale's flipper and a bat's wing perform entirely different tasks. Their similarity lies in structure, not use. Darwin argues that this only makes sense if they were inherited from a common ancestor. He calls this unity of type. Organisms are built on variations of a shared blueprint. Natural selection modifies this blueprint to serve different functions, but it does not erase its underlying pattern. Darwin contrasts this with conditions of existence, meaning adaptation to environment. Unity of type reflects ancestry, while conditions of existence reflect natural selection. Both are necessary to understand life. Embryology provides even stronger evidence. Many animals that look very different as adults are remarkably similar as embryos. Fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals all pass through stages that resemble one another. Darwin argues that these similarities represent inherited traits from ancient ancestors. Early development preserves features that were useful long ago, even if they are later modified or lost. He notes that embryos often display structures that make no sense for their adult lifestyle, such as gill slits in mammals. These structures are remnants of an evolutionary past, not designs for future use. Darwin then turns to rudimentary, vestigial and aborted organs. These are structures that exist in reduced or non-functional form. Examples include the wings of flightless birds, the eyes of cave-dwelling animals, and the appendix in humans. These organs are particularly powerful evidence for evolution because they are difficult to explain under creation. Why would a creator include useless or broken parts? Evolution explains them as inherited remnants. Such organs persist because they are not harmful enough to be eliminated by selection. They are evolutionary leftovers, like faded footprints of history. Darwin emphasizes that rudimentary organs often correspond closely to fully functional organs in related species. This correspondence reveals their origin. A whale's pelvic bones resemble those of land mammals, indicating a terrestrial ancestry. He also discusses how rudimentary organs can vary. Some individuals may have them more developed than others. This variation further supports the idea that these organs are in the process of being reduced or eliminated. Darwin points out that natural selection does not produce perfection. It works by modifying what already exists. As a result, organisms carry traces of their past, including features that no longer serve a purpose. Morphology, embryology, and vestigial organs all tell the same story. They show unity beneath diversity. They reveal dissent beneath adaptation. Darwin concludes that these patterns cannot be dismissed as coincidence. They are consistent across countless species. Together, they form a powerful argument that life has evolved. The body of every organism is a historical document. Beneath its adaptations lie records of ancestry written in bone, tissue, and development. Evolution is not just something that happened long ago, it is visible in every living form. Darwin now steps back to look at the entire argument as a whole. After laying out evidence from domestication, variation, natural selection, geology, geography, classification, embryology, and morphology, he offers a careful recapitulation. This is not a dramatic flourish, but a measured summing up of what has been shown. He begins by restating the central facts. All living organisms vary. No two individuals are exactly alike. Some of these variations affect survival and reproduction. Organisms produce far more offspring than can possibly survive. As a result, there is a constant struggle for existence. From these simple observations follows an unavoidable consequence. Individuals with advantageous variations are more likely to survive and leave offspring. Over generations, these favourable traits become more common. Populations change, species evolve. This is natural selection. Darwin emphasises again that this process is slow and gradual. Evolution does not leap forward in great jumps. It proceeds by small steps, accumulating tiny differences over immense spans of time. What seems impossible within a human lifetime becomes inevitable over geological ages. He reminds the reader that natural selection does not work toward perfection. It works only toward better adaptation in a given context. Organisms are not ideally designed. They are sufficiently adapted to survive and reproduce better than their competitors. Darwin revisits the idea of descent with modification. Species are not independent creations. They descend from earlier species, inheriting traits and modifying them. This process explains both the unity and diversity of life, the shared structures beneath surface differences. He summarizes how each major field of evidence supports this view. Classification reflects branching descent. Embryology reveals common ancestry. Rudimentary organs testify to past functions. Geological succession shows gradual replacement. Geographical distribution reflects migration and isolation. None of these patterns make sense under separate creation. Together, they form a coherent picture under evolution. Darwin acknowledges remaining difficulties. The fossil record is incomplete. The laws of inheritance are not fully understood. Some transitions are obscure, but he argues that these gaps are expected in a young science and do not outweigh the overwhelming explanatory power of his theory. He is careful not to claim certainty beyond evidence. This restraint is deliberate. Darwin does not present evolution as dogma, but as the best explanation available, one that unites facts from many disciplines under a single framework. Darwin also reflects on extinction. Extinction is not an anomaly. It is a natural consequence of evolution. As environments change and competition intensifies, some forms fail to adapt. Their disappearance makes room for others. Life moves forward not by preservation alone, but by continual turnover. He stresses that evolution does not imply progress in any moral or predetermined sense. There is no ladder of improvement, no inevitable march toward complexity. There is only adaptation to local conditions. Bacteria are no less evolved than humans, they are simply adapted to different ways of life. Darwin addresses a common misunderstanding, that natural selection explains everything instantly and perfectly. In reality, it explains trends and tendencies over time. It does not guarantee optimal outcomes, only workable ones. As he concludes his recapitulation, Darwin emphasizes simplicity. The principles underlying evolution are not complex or mysterious. They are grounded in ordinary facts: variation, inheritance, competition, survival. The grand lies not in complexity, but in accumulation. He invites readers to reconsider how they see nature, not as a static collection of forms, but as a dynamic system shaped by history. Every species has a past, every trait has a lineage. Life is not a snapshot, it is a moving picture. Darwin's recapitulation is not triumphal, it is reflective. He knows his theory will be challenged, refined, and expanded, but he is confident that the core idea, descent with modification by natural selection, will endure. The book now approaches its philosophical horizon. Having shown how evolution works, Darwin turns to what it means. Darwin ends The Origin of Species not with technical argument, but with reflection. After pages of evidence and careful reasoning, he steps back and considers the broader significance of his theory. His final words are among the most famous in scientific literature. He asks the reader to imagine life as it truly is, not fixed, not immutable, but constantly changing. From the simplest beginnings, endless forms have arisen, diverged and adapted. This is not a diminished view of life, but an enriched one. Darwin rejects the idea that evolution strips life of meaning. On the contrary, he finds profound beauty in natural processes. The complexity of life does not require constant intervention. It arises naturally from simple laws acting over time. He speaks of laws impressed upon matter: growth, inheritance, variability, and the struggle for existence. From these laws, through natural selection, the vast diversity of life emerges. No guiding hand is required at every step. Nature itself is creative. Darwin emphasizes that this view does not deny wonder, it deepens it. To understand how life evolves does not make it less astonishing. It makes it more so. Complexity arising from simplicity is more remarkable than complexity imposed from outside. He reflects on how all living things are connected. Humans are not separate from nature, but part of it. We share ancestry with every living organism. The same processes that shaped insects and plants shaped us. This realization is humbling. It removes humanity from its position of absolute centrality, but it also places us within a vast, continuous story stretching back millions of years. Darwin acknowledges that his ideas will disturb some readers. They challenge traditional views of creation and human uniqueness. He does not dismiss these concerns lightly, but he insists that understanding nature as it truly is must take precedence over comfort. He reminds the reader that science advances by questioning assumptions, not preserving them. Ideas once seen as threatening often become foundational. Darwin also hints at the future. If evolution is true, then all of biology becomes unified. Classification, anatomy, behaviour, development all gain coherence. Biology becomes a historical science, grounded in descent. He suggests that future discoveries will strengthen the theory. Though he could not know about genes, DNA, or molecular biology, his confidence rests on patterns that transcend specific mechanisms. Darwin ends with his famous image: "Life originally breathed into a few forms, or into one, and from this beginning endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been, and are being, evolved." This is not poetry for its own sake, it is a statement of continuity. Evolution did not stop in the past. It is ongoing. The living world around us is still changing, still adapting, still branching. The grandeur Darwin speaks of lies in scale and connection. Billions of organisms, millions of species, vast stretches of time, all linked through descent, all shaped by the same simple principles. In this view, life is not static but alive in the deepest sense. It is a process, not a product, a story still being written. Darwin closes not with certainty, but with the invitation, an invitation to see nature differently, to follow evidence wherever it leads, and to accept that understanding does not diminish awe. There is grandeur in this view of life, not because it flatters us, but because it tells the truth.